Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a pretty wild journey that bridges two worlds you probably never thought went together. We're going to connect the ancient, cosmic, Islamic theology of the end times directly to a very real, very urgent modern-day socio-political crisis. It's a fascinating story about human nature, epic legends, and honestly, the ultimate search for justice.
But before we look up to the heavens, we kind of have to look in the mirror. My God, what have we done? That was the tragic rhetorical question asked by Robert Lewis. He was the co-pilot of the Enola Gay, and he said this right after dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. It perfectly captures this terrifying moment of sudden realization, a moment of just absolute, catastrophic human self-destruction. And as you'll see today, that exact same terrifying realization of what we're capable of doing to ourselves is what drives the ancient study of the end of the world.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're covering the end of things, the two-horned traveler holding back doomsday, the modern eschatologist, the cancer of corruption, and finally, the final judgment. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the end of things. We're defining the ultimate stakes here. To really understand the modern application of doomsday, we've got to understand the academic theology behind it first. And that brings us to eschatology. It comes from the Greek words asketos, which means last, and logos, meaning theory. So simply put, it's the theory of the last things. It's that whole branch of theology looking at the final events in the history of the world and the ultimate destiny of humanity. But how is this actually structured in Islamic thought? Well, Professor Ishaq Akintola, a really renowned scholar of Islamic eschatology, argues for a very specific framework. While some Western scholars divide it into maybe 3 or 4 parts, Akintola firmly establishes 5 divisions: death, resurrection, judgment, heaven, and hell. He points out that heaven and hell are the absolute crux of the hereafter. They're the final destinations, right? While resurrection is basically the ultimate launching pad to get there. So the stakes literally could not be higher. Moving on to Section 2, the two-horned traveler, a journey to the ends of the earth. To really grasp the terrifying scale of doomsday in Islamic tradition, we have to look at one of the most vivid apocalyptic legends out there, found in the 18th chapter of the Quran. Enter Zulqarnain, which translates to the owner of 2 horns. He's presented as this legendary, righteous prophet king who is given immense power by God to just travel the whole world. Now, that title, 2 horns, is super symbolic. Some classical scholars think it represents him traversing the 2 extremities of the earth, like the east and the west, while others think it's a reference to those ancient horned crowns worn by great conquerors. Let's follow this epic journey and see how it builds, shall we? First, he travels all the way to the furthest west, reaching this muddy spring where the sun actually appears to set. Then, he pivots and travels to the furthest east, where he discovers a people who have absolutely no shelter from the blistering heat of the rising sun. Finally, his journey takes him north, to a treacherous pass right between 2 massive mountains, and it's here that he encounters a people facing a literal existential threat. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the intense historical debate over who Zulqarnain actually was. Academics and theologians have been arguing about this for centuries without a total consensus. Many historians actually link the Quranic account to the Syriac Alexander legends, pointing out that Alexander the Great was depicted on ancient coins with ram horns. Modern commentators, on the other hand, frequently suggest Cyrus the Great, since that aligns with biblical visions of a 2-horned ram. And still, other traditions point to a pre-Islamic South Arabian conqueror named Sab the Maradid. We aren't here to pick a side today, but it really shows how universally powerful this figure's legacy is across different cultures. All right, Section 3, Holding Back Doomsday, the Wall Against Chaos. This brings us to the dramatic climax of his northern journey, where myth directly crashes into the end of the world. Those oppressed people living between the 2 northern mountains, they literally beg Zulqarnain for help against a terrifying, barbaric force of chaos known as Gog and Magog. In Islamic eschatology, Gog and Magog are the absolute ultimate agents of worldly destruction. And here's the scary part. Their eventual release from behind a barrier is considered one of the major signs signaling the day of resurrection. So, to protect the people, Zulqarnain constructs this massive apocalyptic barrier. The text reads, "Give me pieces of iron," till, when he had leveled up the gap between the cliffs, he said, "Blow," till, when he had made it a fire, he said, "Bring me molten copper to pour thereon." Just try to imagine the sheer scale of this. A towering wall of red-hot iron, sealed together with molten copper, standing as literally the only thing holding back total global annihilation until God decides it's time. Section 4, the modern eschatologist. bringing these warnings into the real world.
So you might be wondering, how does a giant iron wall from an ancient text matter to us today? Like, how do we take these cosmic warnings and apply them to our modern society? Well, that is exactly the role of the modern eschatologist. Rather than just studying ancient texts in some dusty ivory tower, a true eschatologist domesticates apocalyptic visions. They use the terrifying theology of the afterlife to combat a society's modern excesses right now. Professor Akintala, for example, uses his incredibly deep knowledge of the final judgment to actively fight bad governance, systemic injustice, and human rights abuses in his home country of Nigeria. He is taking theology and transforming it into real-world activism.
Section 5. The Cancer of Corruption, a Modern Monster. To Akintola, society isn't being destroyed by mythical creatures like Gog and Magog anymore. It's being destroyed by a very real-world threat, corruption. He views it as a self-destructive, nation-killing force that's basically equivalent to a modern apocalypse. Let's look at the staggering scale of this modern monster through some stats from the professor's research. 1.2 billion naira. That is the amount from a vital ecological fund allegedly diverted by a single public official. Money that was meant to protect the environment and keep the public safe, just completely vanishing. And then you have 23,000. That is the number of ghost workers discovered on the payroll in the civil service. Talk about institutional decay. There was even one instance where a single person was reportedly collecting, wait for it, 20 different salaries. I mean, no way, right? It's genuinely hard to wrap your head around. 558.2 million naira. That is the amount allegedly stolen every single month from National Air Force funds by top military brass. When the very institutions that are meant to defend a nation are siphoning off millions, you know the rot has reached the absolute core.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world consequences of all that theft. The UN recommends a ratio of 1 police officer for every 448 civilians. But because of systemic corruption and all those diverted funds, a massive population is left severely under-policed. The institutions break down, security fails. The barrier holding back chaos collapses, not from mythical beasts, but from human greed.
Section 6. The Final Judgment. The Ultimate Deterrent.
So how do you even begin to stop a crisis this deep, especially when earthly laws and courts are so easily bypassed by the wealthy? Well, you bring the narrative full circle. Ancient theology is positioned here as the ultimate psychological solution. The eschatologist reminds the corrupt that, hey, earthly justice might fail, but divine justice is totally inescapable. The fear of an everlasting consequence becomes a massive psychological deterrent. In this ultimate court, you can't hide behind your tribe, your political party, or your VIP status. In fact, leaders who mislead their people are said to receive double the punishment. So the crucial point is that absolutely no amount of stolen earthly wealth can bribe the judge on the day of resurrection. Your money is completely, utterly useless.
And the imagery used to enforce this idea is incredibly vivid. According to a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, if a public official wrongfully takes anything, they will be resurrected publicly carrying that stolen property right on their own head. Just picture that for a second. Imagine a corrupt official forced to physically carry the weight of an entire nation's stolen infrastructure for eternity. It's a totally wild, powerful doomsday image, but it's designed to shock the conscience.
Which brings us right back to where we started today. Whether we are dropping atomic bombs or just systematically dismantling our own societies through rampant corruption, humanity clearly has a terrifying capacity for self-destruction. The stories of iron walls and final judgments, they aren't just ancient myths, they are mirrors held up to our own modern morality. So it leaves us with this. What have we done to our world? And more importantly, how will we answer for it when the barrier finally falls? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope it gave you something powerful to think about. Catch you next time.